All right, let's do 2016 problem number 1. So, keep in mind this would have been the first one when you opened up your test to do. So we had this histogram, and these were tips for a day. So these were the tips. And so then there's our histogram distribution. So write a few sentences to describe the distribution. So that is your socks of the tip amounts for the day shown. Okay, so what you would want to do, since we would find it difficult, first of all, since it is skewed to the right, describing the center as the mean or the spread as the standard deviation, which actually would have been difficult to do, is not appropriate. Remember, if you have skew, then you should choose to use median and IQR. If you have skew, then you should choose to use median and IQR. So here is so that's why I went ahead and I figured out that since there are 60 tips, then the Q1 would be the 15th, the 25th, Q1 is the first quartile. So 0.25 times 60 tips means the 15th piece of data is where the tip would be located for Q1. The median is the 50th percentile, so the 50th percent of 60, the 30th piece of data. And then the Q3 is the 75th percentile of the 60, so the 45th. So I went ahead and I found those. I could tell that for the 20, since I have 25 pieces of data here, then the 15th piece of data is right here. So there's where my Q1 is located. My median is the 30th piece of data. So 25 plus 5 more. So whatever value that one is, that piece of data there is the 30th piece of data. And then the 45th would have been, what is that? 25 plus 22 is 47. So actually, the 45th piece of data is still in this second bar. So interesting. So that Q3 would have been really small, or that third part of the box. So what we'd be looking at is, I don't exactly know the size, but this spread from the median to the Q3 is not very far. So 2.5 to at most 5. Okay, here we go. So there is that written out. So therefore, my IQR, the lowest that the Q1 could be is 0. The highest that the Q3 could be is just below 5. So the biggest that the IQR could be is at most 5. All right. And think about it this way. This 15th piece of data, the biggest it could be is right up to, but not including 2.5. So, and then say this one was just filled with a whole bunch of 2.5s. And maybe even if this was still 2.5, so you could have an IQR that was very, very small. Not likely, but at most $5 is that middle IQR. So describing the distribution. So the shape is unimodal and skewed to the right. Okay. O is for outliers. And so, you want to describe any unusual features or outliers. So here I have this gap here from 15 up to 20. And then I feel pretty confident in saying, without even computing my fences, that this would probably be an outlier. But I did do the fences. So say if this is the highest that the fence could, say this Q3 was 5, which I don't know sure. If that Q3 was 5, then plus 1.5 times the biggest IQR I could have, that would put that fence at 12.5. So honestly, there's probably going to be at least 2 outliers. Okay, upper outliers. So we'll look and see how they did that criteria whenever they did the grading. So there's several outliers. I know there's at least one up here at the 20. And I think they required you just to say that one. But technically, because of this mathematics here, there also that one there in this 1250 up to 15 is also one. And look, there's a gap here between 15 up to 20. All right, center is best described by the median because of the skew. I don't think you had to say that, but that's why I'm definitely choosing the median. And it is some number from 250, it's right here. It's this one here, 250 up to, but not including 5. And then I did that spread. So I don't know exactly what that is, but it's at most 5. It's probably less than that, but it's at most 5. So let's look at how that's graded. Here we go. So you can read here if you wanted to how they put what their ideal example was, but here's how they scored it. You get essentially correct if you had these things. You had to identify that the shape was skewed right. You didn't have to say unimodal, but you had to say skewed right. You had to say that there was at least one outlier or that there was a gap with one tip greater than 20 and the next highest at 15. Okay, so we would have done that. Center is a median between 250 and 5. Now, I don't know exactly how you would have come up with this mean, but there's some values there. Variability, by noting that the tip amounts vary from about 0 to at most 22. So that would have been the range. So they let you say the range, or that a majority, so that middle 50th percentile is between 0 and 5. So that's kind of like the IQR. Or you could have even provided approximately how many, uh, a correct numerical approximation of that variability. Okay. But do you see how we also had to be specific on these numerical values? And then you had to also discuss in terms of these being tips and dollar amounts. So I hope I did that. Let's go look here and see what I wrote. Oh, I did. Good. There's a few tips and I used dollars and that kind of thing. So that context was required. So you get all credit, full credit, if you had all 5 of those things: shape, outlier, center, spread, in context. Partially correct if you had only 3 or 4 of those. So if you missed 2, you had a P. If you had less than 3 of them correct, you got 0 credit for that component. All right, next they asked us what happens if one of the tips was 8, but if that tip was 18 instead, what effect would that have had on the following statistics? Justify your answer, the mean. Okay, so let's think about this. So if say you had all of your numbers here and then here, let's see, the 8 would have been in here. Okay, so if this 8 was now up here instead, so it got moved from 8 to 18. Okay, so then if you think about when you get a mean and you sum up all of the data and divide by 60, well, this particular piece of data going from 8 to 18 would have made that total sum $10 higher. So when you do that total sum, $10 higher divided by the 60 tips, it obviously would have gone up. In fact, we could have even said how much it would have increased by doing $10 divided by 60 is how much the old mean would have increased by. So in order to get credit for this, you had to say that way and the reason in which, first you had to say it went up, But then you had to say how that happens. And that has to do with because that sum of the tips is now $10 higher. In fact, let's look specifically at how this is. Comments that the mean will increase and correctly justifies why that mean will increase, which of course is because that sum is now higher, $10 higher. So then that increases that mean. Okay, the next, let's talk about why the median does not change. So the median would have stayed the same. Therefore, the median would not change. So let's talk about that. The median is located right here, I believe is where we said it was. So here is the median. Okay. Furthermore, the 45th piece of data, look, here was that Q3. Okay. So this here is the top quartile, the top 25% of data. So moving a piece of data from here to here, it would just still be in that same top 25%. So whenever you are knocking off the edges to get to the middle, so when I'm knocking off, the low and the high, and the low and the high, and the low and the high to get to that median, which is right there in the middle. So to get to that median, when I'm knocking off the low and the high and the low and the high and the low and the high, then I'm still knocking off all of this quartile to reach that middle. Therefore, it doesn't change. So let's look at how I wrote that out. The changes from 8 to 18 would keep it in the top 25% of tips. Therefore, the median would not change because the 30th to 35th first piece of data would not have changed values. They would still be the 30th piece of data is still there in the middle, not affected by this top piece of data changing. All right, so let's see here's how they wrote that out. The median would not change because the current median is between 250 and 5, and both 8 and 18 are greater than that. So I think you probably could have done a little bit better explaining, but here's what they had to say. Comment that the median doesn't change and justify why that is the case. So there were only two components. So if you got both essentially correct, you got a 4, and EAP was a 3. EI or PP was a 2, and a PI was a 1. All right, so that's the end of that problem. That was what, 2016 problem number 1.